All right, welcome back to the Twitchy Theologian. I'm your host, the Twitchy Theologian, aka Family Dollar James White, aka the Paladin Calvinist. And as you can see, I'm rocking my 1689 cigars hat. They sent me that. I'm rocking my abolitionist gear, my abolitionist rising gear. So check them out, Abolitionist Rising. Check out 1689 cigars. Today we're going to be talking about the Book of Revelation, and we're going to cover a lot of stuff. We really are. I want you to know, guys, I've been working really hard. Okay. So this is one of the first books I read on post-mill eschatology. Let me turn this, make it easier to see. He Shall Have Dominion by Ken Gentry. I encourage everyone to read this. Also, Post-Mill Made Easy. Recently, I purchased these two bad boys, The Divorce of Israel by Ken Gentry, 2-volume commentary on the book of Revelation. And yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. I am slowly going through it. I'm learning a lot. And I'm going to convey some of that information to you guys tonight. One of the first things that I want to talk about is the dating of Revelation. Now, it's important to know that regardless of whether you accept the late date or the early date, the late date's usually given in around AD 95, the early date given around AD 67, 68, somewhere in there. Some even all the way back to 65. But regardless, whether you take the early date or the late date, it's not really going to affect the way I would interpret Revelation. So I am what is called a partial preterist. So there are partial preterists, which means that a lot of the prophetic stuff in the New Testament have been fulfilled, but there's definitely one thing, probably many more, but definitely one at least that has yet to be fulfilled. Christ has not returned. We have not had a bodily resurrection, etc. Partial preterism. There is historicism, which sees the book of Revelation kind of as like a book of history, and they would interpret the beast to be like the Pope or something. Then there's the idealist, which sees Revelation kind of as cycles of history, right? Like all of Revelation is symbols, which tells us about history and what's going to occur throughout history. There's the futurist, which takes Revelation and reads a newspaper beside it and says, okay, if I see this going on and that going on, you see that in like more your dispensational circles. Homeboy talking about the blood moon, can't remember his name, John Hagee or something. Then the books, that were written about it, what were they called? Boy, oh boy, that's why you need to write things down, Jerry. But yeah, all of those books. Somebody in the comments tell me how dumb I am and tell me about those books. But I'm an iterist. I take the partial preterist view and say, yes, this is true. I take a little idealism and say this is true. A little historicism, say that's true, and a very small tad bit of futurism, say there's a little bit of truth in that. But I'm going to give you the partial preterist view of Revelation because that's what Ken Gentry is, and I think he does a phenomenal job. And again, I agree with everything that he says. I might just add a little to it. Anyways, I'm going to teach you that, and regardless of if Revelation is written in AD 95 or AD 65, I think, and Dr. Gentry believes that it is about, for the most part, the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem and the Jerusalem wars, etc. Now, I'm going to prove, though, beyond any doubt, that Revelation was written before the destruction of the temple. Now, if it was written afterwards, John could just be explaining what happened. But I'm going to talk about why it was written before, and I'm going to prove it. Now, Gentry says, currently, most biblical scholars disagree with the majority view from 100 years ago. So currently, most people hold to the late date. They think it was written around AD 95. I think that was about the Domitian reign. And they say that's what it's when it was written. But I think it was Charles Talbert. He said, quote, during the 18th and the 19th centuries, most European scholars tended to date Revelation at the end of Nero's reign during the reign of Galba. Now that's around June 68 to January 69. Late date advocate in 1851, E.W. Hingenberg. Sorry, I had to hurry and write these notes. Okay, it's late. Anyways, he says that the quote that the book was composed before the destruction of Jerusalem has been pretty generally acquiesced in. So again, this 1851, this is confirming that 100 years ago, most people took the early date view. And this is a late date guy who's saying this. Okay. J.L. Ratton in 1915, that's about 60 years later, says the same thing. Essentially, he says the great majority of modern scholars of every shade of religion and of unbelief adopt an early date for the apocalypse, i.e., before the fall of the temple. So he's saying for the great majority of scholars of every single religion, even the unbelievers, they say it was pre 70. Okay. Now, late day advocates, when they argue with me, they like to bring up one guy all the time. Irenaeus, Irenaeus this, Irenaeus that. When I learned about this in Bible college, it was Irenaeus, Irenaeus, Irenaeus. Well, I'll get to that in a moment. Trust me. B.B. Warfield said, quote, the whole tradition of Domitian origin of the apocalypse hangs on Irenaeus. That's a heavy statement. Warfield's saying, if we don't have Irenaeus, we can't prove that Revelation was written in AD 95. It's impossible. He's saying it's all hanging on Irenaeus. Keep that in mind because I'm about to refute it. And the way I'm going to refute it is by this video I just pulled up by Ken Gentry. Number one, Irenaeus can't count. Okay? Homeboy couldn't count. Listen to what Gentry says.
To recognize that when he refers to the living witness going back in time, he sometimes is fundamentally wrong. For instance, in Against Heresies, Book 2, Chapter 22, Paragraph 5, he says that he had heard from the apostles through their disciples to the present time, he had heard that Jesus had a 15-year ministry and he died about the age 50. Now, I think even maybe you don't know all the implications of dating in the New Testament, but I think you all know that Jesus probably died sometime around 30, 33 years old, thereabouts. And for Irenaeus to use this argument of the living witness of the church to affirm that Christ had a 15-year ministry, not a 3-year ministry, and that he lived to be 50 instead of living to be 33 or thereabouts, I think you can see that there's a problem with this.
Wow. As I said, homeboy can't count. Okay? That's issue number one. Homie thought Jesus lived till 55, so why should we trust him with the dating, right? He gets things wrong. But that's not even the biggest issue. Matter of fact, I can take what Irenaeus said and prove that it actually supports the early date view and not the late date view. And I'm about to prove that one moment. And once again, I'm going to let Gentry speak for himself. Now, all of this is in this book, but I did a lot of research to find him saying these things to be more entertaining to you guys than me just reading a book. So listen to what he has to say.
Tell us something about the book of Revelation directly, but he's actually dealing with the name of the Antichrist. That's his main purpose. Let's notice what he says here and consider it carefully. I want us to look at it. And you can see why the late date advocate who believes John wrote under Domitian rather than the early date advocate who believes he wrote under Nero, you can see why the late date advocate would see Irenaeus' statement as being so important. Irenaeus says, quote, we will not, however, incur the risk of pronouncing positively as to the name of Antichrist. For if it were necessary that his name should be distinctly revealed in the present time, it would have been announced by him who beheld the apocalyptic vision. For that was seen no very long time ago, but almost in our day towards the end of Domitian's reign. Now notice here that he says, he's talking about the Antichrist. Who is the Antichrist? And his argument is going to be, we don't know. John does not tell us who the Antichrist was, and he says it in this way. It would have been announced by him who beheld the apocalyptic vision, for that was seen no very long time ago, but almost in our day towards the end of Domitian's reign. Well, so you can see that it's value for the late date argument. Irenaeus says it was written, or it appears he's saying it was written almost in our day at the end of Domitian's reign. But there are problems, and I want to list three. The problem of translation, the problem of transition, and the problem of attestation. First is a problem of translation. Greek is what's called an inflected language. You can have a verb all by itself without a pronoun or noun with it, and the noun idea or the pronoun idea is contained in the Greek verb itself. That being so, his statement, for that was seen no very long time ago, can be either it was seen, the book of Revelation was seen, or he was seen. Irenaeus can be saying either the book of Revelation was seen by the Apostle John not long ago in Domitian's reign, or it can be translated to say he who wrote the Revelation was seen not long ago in Domitian's reign. And so the issue is when someone brings out Irenaeus, we have to recognize there's a problem. We don't know if he's saying it was seen or he was seen. Revelation was seen or John was seen.
Yeah, so clearly, guys, it could go either way according to the argument given there. But Gentry argues in other places, and I would argue as well, in Against Heresies, Book 5, Chapter 30. That's what he just quoted. Irenaeus actually talks about ancient manuscripts or ancient writings, ancient copies that they have of Revelation. Well, why would he say there's ancient copies of Revelation, paper sources, ancient, if the vision itself was seen not so long ago? That wouldn't make sense. It would make more sense for him to say there's ancient copies of Revelation. It's been written down. And John didn't tell us the number, even though he was seen not long ago. That makes so much more sense of the text. And I would just encourage you guys to look at that. But regardless, the early church, they got things right, they got things wrong. There is external evidence for Revelation being written before AD 70. But anyways, we'll get to that in a moment. And let me say this. Let me give a caveat. Guys, if you disagree with me, that's okay. Put it in the comments. This is stuff that we can argue about as brothers. Shouldn't be a divisive issue. This is such... Listen, Luther at one point didn't even accept Revelation as canon. I don't think he wrote on it. Or Zwingli did not write on it. John Calvin, who wrote a commentary on nearly every book of the Bible except for, I think, 2nd and 3rd John. He did not write on Revelation either. He didn't write a commentary. This is a difficult book. So it's tough to work through, but we're going to do it together, guys. Now, so I've presented to you the late date argument. B.B. Warfield says it all hinges on Irenaeus, and I've shown you that Irenaeus really doesn't say what people think that he's saying, and actually Irenaeus is probably on my side when we translate it correctly in light of the context. But I'm going to prove to you through internal evidence that the book of Revelation was written pre-AD 70, which is the destruction of Jerusalem, if you haven't caught on to that yet, or the destruction of the temple, whatever. So Revelation speaks of the temple as if it's still standing in Revelation 11, 1 and 2. And Gentry calls this architectural evidence. And I'm going to read some of what he said. First, going to read Revelation 11, 1-2. Get up and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship in it. Leave out the court which is outside the temple and do not measure it, for it has been given to the nations, and they will tread underfoot the holy city for 42 months. So, first, Gentry points out that he speaks of the holy city. And he says Jerusalem is frequently called the holy city in Scripture. Isaiah 48:2, 52:1, Nehemiah 11:1, Nehemiah 11:18, Matthew 4, verse 5, Matthew 27, verse 53. Second, Revelation 11:8 informs us that this is the city where the Lord was crucified. Okay. Third, Revelation 11:3 indicates that when a tenth of the city fell, 7,000 were killed, so that the apparent population of the city is 70,000. Now, according to Josephus, the population was slightly more, maybe like 120,000, but it certainly cannot fit with the population of Rome, which was around 1 million at the time. So, important internal evidence there. Also, Gentry argues that Revelation is referring to, hold on. So, according to John, the temple would come under assault for a period of 42 months. Okay, this is important. 42 months. The Jewish war with Rome lasted from spring AD 67 until August or September AD 70, a period right at the requisite time frame. And I'm basically reading Gentry here, guys. So it would seem from Revelation 11 that there is a lot of evidence indicating that Revelation was written pre AD 70. Now I want to look at page 28 in his book. He says, quote, Revelation 11, 1-2 clearly reflects a logia from Jesus's Olivet Discourse, which is recorded in Luke 21, 24, in Luke 21, 5-7, and of course, Matthew 24 and all that. Now, listen to this. Revelation 11:2, leave out the court which is outside the temple and do not measure it, for it has been given to the nations, the ethne, and they will tread underfoot the holy city for 42 months. Now, Luke 21:24, and they will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles, ethne, until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So we see a clear parallel there. And I'm going to play another video by Gentry where he kind of talks about this. Now, this is more of a recording than an actual video, but I have a lot of videos to show you guys today that support everything that I say. I'm not the only guy to say this. Doug Wilson, Jeff Durbin, R.C. Sproul, all would basically have my back in what I'm saying. And so would Dr. Gentry. So let's pull him up and see what he has to say.
That John is referring to the destruction of that temple in the first century. And one further evidence in the architectural field is that both Jesus' prophecy in Luke 21:24 and John's prophecy in Revelation 11:2, both of these fit the Jewish war, because John says they will trample underfoot the holy city for 42 months. That is, that's when the full-scale Roman war against Jerusalem occurs. It erupts when Vespasian enters the land of Israel in spring of AD 67, and the temple is destroyed in August AD 70, which is a period of right at 42 months. And likewise, in Luke 21, he says that will be until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So he gives a temporal designate there as well. And what he means by that, I believe, is that in the past, the Gentiles could destroy the temple and attack God's people. But now that the temple is going to be removed by God, the Gentiles will no longer be able to attack the people of God at a central location and destroy the people of God, because Christianity is spread throughout the world. It's not localized in one particular temple. And so to attack Christianity, it's all over the place. It's not at one location. But the first line of evidence, then, is the architectural evidence that in the book of Revelation, the temple is still standing, and it is subject to a trampling under the feet of the Gentiles, which has not yet occurred, but which does occur in AD 70.
All right, so you heard him. That's his one of his key evidences is Revelation 11:2. That's clear internal evidence that this was written pre AD 70. Now, moving on to more internal evidence, we see what he calls the political evidence. He says, quote, in Revelation 17, we discover a vision of the seven-headed beast, which suggests that John wrote Revelation before the death of Nero, which was AD 68. We read in Revelation 17, 9 and 10, here is the mind which has wisdom. The seven heads are seven mountains on which the woman sits, and they are seven kings. 5 have fallen. One is, the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must remain a little while. Now, first, the seven mountains must represent the famed seven hills of Rome. As Mounts observes, quote, there's little doubt that a first century reader would understand this reference in any way other than a reference to Rome, the city built upon seven hills. Rome began as a network of seven hill settlements on the left bank of the Tiber and was from the time of Servius Tullius, her sixth king in the pre-emperor era, and Urbs Septicalis, whatever that means. All right. Now, how would they understand it? How would the original audience understand it? They would have understood that to be referring to Rome. Now, second, let's consider the seven kings here. And again, remember, 5 have fallen. There's 7 kings, 5 have fallen. One is, the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must remain a little while. Okay. Josephus, when talking about the emperors, he gives us essentially this list. First is Julius. Second, Augustus. 3, Tiberius. 4, Gaius, also known as Caligula. And 5, Claudius. So 5 are now deceased, meaning it was written, and the 6th was when the 6th was emperor, and the 6th is Nero. Okay. The 7th is Galba, who reigned for only 7 months. Remember, it says, when he comes, he must remain a little while. So that clear evidence, clear internal evidence that this was written during the reign of Nero. But don't take my word for it. I'm going to have someone else say it. Now, someone would say, hold up, wait a minute. It's supposed to be kings, not emperors. Well, Sproul's got something to say to you, sir. And he's got my back.
There's ample evidence to indicate that the Jewish people called the Roman rulers kings.
That's right.
So if we start with Julius Caesar as number 1, Augustus number 2, Tiberius 3, Caligula 4, Claudius 5, who's 6? Nero. Would indicate that the book was written during the reign of Nero, which explains a ton of questions with respect to the internal significance of the content of this book.
You heard it, folks. You heard it. R.C. Sproul, the man himself, agrees with what I'm saying. And he said it was written during the reign of Nero. Guys, you can check out more of his stuff. It's called In the Last Days of Jesus. I think he's got a book and a lot of teachings on Ligonier about that. So please check that out. But furthermore, I would prove that it was written pre-AD 70 because, well, the mark of the beast points to Nero. And I'm going to play some videos that explain that as well. I'm going to let Durbin and Wilson talk about this a little bit.
as a Hebrew cryptogram, Neron, Kaiser, Nero, Caesar, the beast who is, and interpret that number. You do the number, and it's Neron, Kaiser, Nero, Caesar. So
yeah, and I want to point out that John knew who it was.
Yes,
John knew who it was, and he expected any clever sophomore in Ephesus to be able to figure out who it was.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah, let him who has wisdom figure this out. Get
Yeah.
your pencil out, work it out. And I can't imagine some kid, some sophomore in the first century, looking up at his dad saying, "Henry Kissinger? Who's Henry Kissinger?"
That's all.
And so maybe you're like, what is he talking about? What is this cryptogram thing that they're talking about? I'm going to pull up another video. I've been hitting pause, but I'm not going to hit pause now. I'm actually going to go to this one, and then we're going to play another one by Dougie
that
Fresh.
We would say are actually referencing Nero, Caesar Nero. He only persecuted Christians for a particular amount of time in history. He died by his sword. He did demand worship. All of that is fixed in history, and his name is what it is. And if you know the Hebrew cryptogram, it is what it is.
What is this, though? What is this cryptogram that it's talking about? Well, you just wait, my friends. I'm about to show you here in a moment. Now, first, let's listen to what Dougie Fresh has to say. He's gonna keep. I keep having videos.
I believe that 666 is the number of a man, and I believe that handled rightly, it translates out to the name of Nero Caesar.
And that's from promoting his commentary when the man comes around. And now let's get to Sproul. Explains it the best I've ever heard, and it's irrefutable.
About the cryptic number that the author of Revelation warns the people to be alert to, and is cluing them in to a manner in which he can be recognized. And he indicates that this beast can be known by a number, and the number is the number 666. Now, before I explore that number, I want to also mention that oddly, in some variant manuscripts that go way back in history of the book of Revelation, there is a textual variant in this verse, so that the number that is listed there is not the number 666, but it is the number 616. Now, a textual variant is usually understood to take place when the original manuscript was copied by hand by a monk or by somebody, and in the process of copying, in that laborious, tedious process of copying word for word the text of Scripture, occasionally a letter was missed, or somebody forgot to cross a T or dot an I, or a simple mistake entered into the process. And by the careful study of the existing manuscripts that we have from antiquity, we see that these things happened, and several examples of them. But this may be of special significance, as we shall see in a moment. In the ancient world, cryptograms were a common thing. A cryptogram was an encoded message whereby numbers and letters were related. Now, in the three major language groups that we're concerned about here in antiquity, namely Hebrew, Greek, and Latin, all three of them had systems of using their letters for numbers, so that all three languages were used in cryptogrammatical ways. We're familiar with this even today, at least with respect to Latin, because we are aware of the use of Roman numerals. And Roman numerals are simply Latin letters that have a numerical value. Like the Latin letter X has the numerical value of 10. The Latin letter V has a numerical value of 5. The Latin letter M has a numerical value of 1,000. And so on with D and L and I and other letters that have a clear numerical value. Now, this was also true in Hebrew. And if we looked at the name of Nero in Hebrew, we get the name transliterated Neron Kaiser. That is Nero Caesar. and in the Hebrew alphabet and numerology. This name, Nero Kaiser, when translated into numbers, comes to the number 666. Exactly. However,
Get
in
this.
the
Get this. This is the big one for me.
ancient world, the Greek name of Caesar changed from Neron Kaiser to Nero Kaiser, a very slight variation in the writing, and the Greek numerical equivalency of the Greek form of the name of the Emperor Nero came out to the number 616.
Guys, it explains a textual variant. Like, dude, that view explains a textual variant. That's nuts. Because he's trying to explain it to Greek people too. Like, Hebrew people, you know Hebrew. You know how to work this. Figure out who it is and tell everyone. And then he tells everyone. But why did he have to make everything a secret? Because you don't write literature at that time that's talking bad about the emperor. You keep it secret. So he's writing all this apocalyptic imagery and the number being 666 so the people don't know, but the Hebrew people, they can figure it out. And we want the Greeks to know. So in the manuscript 616, boom, they got to figure it out. And these people would have known who it was. Just like Doug said, let he who has wisdom figure this number out. It had to mean something to the original audience, people. So if you're going to be a futurist, you have to interpret it in light of what it meant to the original audience. You have to. But I would suggest you just listen up to what we're saying here, please. But that's the internal evidence. There's tons more. But I'm going to go now to the external evidence. He talks about the Muratorian canon. And it says, quote, the blessed apostle, following the rule of his predecessor John, writes to no more than 7 churches by name. So this is what Gentry says, quote, Paul is said to follow John in writing to 7 churches. This demands that the writer of the document holds a view of Revelation's date being earlier than AD 67 or 68, because that's the date of Paul's beheading. So to explain it, it's the Muratorian canon, the writer of that, which is basically just a list of books that this dude thought was canon. He says Paul followed John in writing to no more than 7 churches by name. Well, in Revelation, John writes to 7 churches by name. If Paul actually temporally followed John, then Revelation had to be written before 68 because that's when Paul kicked the bucket. Okay, now he also refers to Clement of Alexandria, and I'm going to let Dr. Gentry explain that himself. Let me pull it up. I'm not going to keep hitting pause because I might hit the wrong button, and we've gotten too far for me to hit the wrong button, and then for it not to work, I would freak out if it restarted me. And that's possible. You hit the reset button, all this is erased. It would be horrible. Anyways, Clement of Alexandria, late date. Here we go. Or early date is what that should say. I'm tired, people. So as you can see, we got some external evidence there. I think also the temporal expectation is something that Gentry writes on quite a bit on pages 46 and 47 of his commentary. Revelation opens, quote, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show to his bondservants the things which must soon take place. Then John also uses the word Ingus, which is near. Blessed is he who reads and those who hear the words of this prophecy and heeds the things which are written in it, for the time is near, close to happening. We see frequent repetition of these this near language: soon, near, little time, brief time, no more time, quickly. We see that in Revelation 1:1, 3, 22:6, 22:7, 22:10, 22:12, 22:20, over and over and over and over again. These things are, it's a brief time in Revelation 12:12, a little time in Revelation 6:11, no more time, Revelation 10:6. Time and time again, we see this temporal expectation, right? So that's pretty important. And if these things are soon to take place, what did they refer to? Again, I'm going to show as we go throughout this that it's referring to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. Now, the main theme, I believe, kind of indicates, the main thing of Revelation indicates that, yeah, it's about the destruction of the temple, which happened AD 70. Therefore, it must have been written before. All right. John states his theme in his introduction, quote, behold, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn over him. So it is to be. Amen. That's Revelation 1:7. And just so you know, tribes of the earth, pretty sure that is Gad there, which can mean land, but that's not written here in the book. But let me continue. Gentry says, quote, Revelation's main focus of attention, though not its only point, is that God will soon judge the first century Jews for rejecting and crucifying his son, their Messiah. That is the judgment of Revelation came especially against those in the first century who cried out, crucify him. His blood shall be on us and our children. Matthew 27:22 and cross-reference John 19:12-15. And he continues, we must note that John states his theme at 1:7, just a few verses after he declares the nearness of the events in the book, Revelation 1:1 and 1:3. He talks about he's coming with the clouds. The cloud coming image is often used in Scripture as prophetic parlance for historical divine judgments upon nations. Isaiah speaks of God's coming judgment against Egypt in similar terms. Quote, behold, the Lord is riding on a swift cloud and is about to come to Egypt. The idols of Egypt will tremble at his presence, and the heart of the Egyptians will melt within them. That's Isaiah 19:1. Like John, Jesus mentions the coming on the clouds against Israel in Matthew 23:36 and Matthew 24:2 and 16. And he says, all these things will come upon this generation. He tells the dude, you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds. That's judgment language there, okay? All right. Furthermore, John specifically states that this coming will be directed against those who pierced him. That is the first century Jews who demanded his crucifixion. Jesus' teaching lays the covenantal blame for his crucifixion on the Jews. Matthew 20:18, Matthew 21:33-43, and Luke 9:22. The apostles did the same. For instance, speaking to the Jews of, quote, Jesus Christ the Nazarene, whom you crucified, Acts 4:10. So I've skipped a lot because there's only so much I can cover. This is a very in-depth book. Now, some would say, well, this wouldn't have been relevant to John's original audience in Asia Minor. Like, it doesn't make sense. But Gentry says, quote, I believe that this event was extremely relevant to those Christians for several reasons, end quote. Now I'm going to list some. Number one, the church's headquarters were basically in Jerusalem until the fall. Like, if your OG headquarters, we'll say Washington, D.C., suddenly crumbled, that would be very discouraging to all of the United States, right? So when the church's headquarters are just crumbling, their encouragement needs to be written to the other churches, letting them know, like, hey, this isn't the end. And that's actually what one guy says. I'm not going to quote him because I don't want you to look him up. I don't think he's that great. He said Christians would need to know this isn't the end of the covenant kingdom, right? And then I think this is relevant to the Christians in Asia Minor because it's showing what happens to those who break the covenant. You are a covenant breaker. Deuteronomy tells us a lot of bad things are going to happen, and those bad things happen in the destruction of the temple and the Jerusalem wars. You can read Eusebius on that. You can read Josephus on that. Like, the covenant curses came upon them, dude. That's why when you look at the plagues that are in Revelation, it parallels the plagues of Egypt. And actually, if I'm remembering correctly, somewhere in Revelation, it actually refers to Jerusalem as Egypt and Sodom and something else. But yeah. Third, this established Christianity, and maybe fourth, I don't know where I'm at now, but it established Christianity as a separate religion. Like, at the time, Gentry spends a lot of time showing this. At the time, like, Christianity was basically just like kind of a small offshoot of Judaism. A lot of these guys were still going to synagogue and stuff, and Paul's reasoning in the synagogue all the time, et cetera, et cetera. But this truly established it as a separate religion, and it pushed Christianity out, right? It pushed it out. It also is important because it fulfills Jesus's teachings in Mark 9:1 and many other places like the Olivet Discourse. But Mark 9:1 says, truly I say to you, there are some of those who are standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God come with power. And I want to read this quote here. The Jewish war was not simply another war among so many that have punctuated human history. It was a conflict that was important in four key areas: Roman imperial history, Jewish religious history, biblical redemptive history, and Christian prophetic history. And then he goes on to explain those for quite a while. And I haven't really got through all of that yet. But yeah, I think that I've made a pretty decent case that, well, I'll just read the conclusion here. I'm convinced that John wrote Revelation prior to the destruction of Jerusalem, AD 70. That's what I've tried to convince you guys of. And even prior to the death of Nero, AD 68. Revelation 1:9 provides evidence that tribulation had already broken out in its earliest stages as John was writing. Quote, I, John, your brother and fellow participant in the tribulation. Gentry then goes on to say, this tribulation would be the Neronic persecution, which began in November AD 64. Guys, there's a lot of evidence that I've presented in a short 45-minute video. And he lists much more here, but I could only get to so much. I hope that this was useful to you. If it is, please leave a comment, like, subscribe, share this to others, and, let me know if you want me to keep doing videos on this. Thanks. Grace and peace.